Samach Beis, the Mishnah. Hamakadish is isha. Person marries a woman. The Omar, Kesavar Hagisi Shi Kohenis. He didn't marry her in kiddushin. I'm marrying on the condition that you're a Kohenis, that you're a Bas Kohen. Harihi Levio. He said nothing. Let's say he thought this in his mind, but he didn't express it at all. He married her, Harei Mukdeshesli, said nothing more than that. And afterwards he says, but initially only married because I thought she was a Kohenis. I thought she was a Levio. Levio Vari Kohenis. I thought she was a Levio. She turned out to be a Kohenis. Aniya Vari Yishiro. I thought she was poor, and she turned out to be wealthy. He doesn't want to marry a person of status, a wealthy person. Ashira, he had in mind to marry a wealthy woman. She's not what I thought she was. But again, the marriage was not a conditional marriage, on the condition she's wealthy or poor. But this is what he tells us afterwards. This is what I thought. Harezu, no, it's not. People marry poor women. People marry wealthy women, right? That's what's in Dvarim Shibalev. Harezu Mukudeshes. What's the reverse now? He said nothing. He said there's something he says afterwards. No, because again, there he said, I'm marrying her. He tells her I'm a Kohen, and she's only agreeable to marry him because he's a Kohen. So of course it's not. That's the reason. That's a mekachtos. Here was he said nothing, but he tells us afterwards. I assumed she was wealthy, and she turned out not. Therefore, I never intended to marry a woman if she was poor. No, she didn't mislead him. That's what the Gemara says. She's married. She never misled him. If she would have misled him, and it's clear he's only married because he believed she was or she is what she presented herself to be, and she's not, that is one thing. I'll give you an example. We had earlier something that's an anatzadi would say with certainty that a person would not want to marry this kind of person. Let's say a person marries a woman, he believes she's observant. She's observant. Turns out she's not observant whatsoever. She misled him. Definitely, mekachtos. It's mekachtos. Because we could say with certainty an observant person would not want to marry a woman who's not observant, right? But a person, I thought she was wealthy. She's not, she's poor. I would have never married a poor girl. Why people marry poor girls? Therefore, that's a dvarim shibalev. No, she did not mislead him. No, but I'm saying. No, but I'm just saying. He didn't do his homework, whatever it is. But the presumption is, she understands who he is. She understands he's an observant one. He understands who she. The presumption is a religious man would only marry an observant person, and if she's not observant, he doesn't want to marry. We'd say that with certainty. I'm talking a person who's truly observant. I'm not talking a person who's quasi-observant. You know, she'll become a balas tshuva. You know, we're not talking about that. Or she'll be okay. They'll have an arrangement between the two of them. There's no question in our mind. The person who comes from this kind of background, it's either you are or you're not. So that's with certainty. Anything which you could say with certainty, that's his position, that's the equivalent of expressing it. He doesn't have to express it. No. Eina Mukadeshes. 1,000%. Because we'd say, because you're not permitted, a Kohen's not permitted, we'd say with certainty, if he would have known, he would have never married her. We had a case, let's say a woman has a physical defect, right? Even though he used to say, well, I'm only marry you only if you're in perfect health. But this type of defect, the average person would not marry such a woman. It's mekachtos. Even though she didn't mislead him, but we could say he assumed, the presumption was that he wasn't aware of the defect. Eina Mukadeshes.
She also knows that the divorcee knows that she's not supposed to marry a Kohen. If she doesn't tell him she's a divorcee, she's misleading him.
She's not, whatever it is. Let's say she didn't know. Let's say she didn't know. She didn't know she's not permitted. She didn't know. It's irrelevant. Because anything we'd say with certainty that he wouldn't have wanted to get involved, it's the equivalent of expressing it. I'm marrying on the condition that you are eligible for me. You're not a woman that's eligible for me.
So that marriage it never happened.
Never happened.
These cases that they feel, why is place a condition on the marriage.
Okay, good question. Is Dvarim Shebelev?
No, after the fact, he came up with
I mean, the Gemara discussed Dvarim Shebelev. It was discussed in the Gemara. It wasn't discussed in the Mishnah. It wasn't discussed in the Mishnah. Dvarim Shebelev in Dvarim. We quoted a state. A person sold a piece of property on the condition that he's ascending to Eretz Yisrael, and he sold his property. But it wasn't a conditional sale. He didn't say, I'm only selling my property if I should make the move. If I won't make the move, then the sale's not a sale. He didn't say that. So even though we all knew that he's selling his property because he believed he was moving to Eretz Yisrael, and afterwards it fell through, he ended up not going, the Gemara says it's not a sale. It is a sale. Because he should have expressed, because there it's not, doesn't have that degree of certainty that what? Because he should have said it, and because he didn't say it, therefore it's not considered conditional sale. And it's Dvarim Shebelev. I just want to read Rashi. There's a Rashi over here, which to me is difficulty. So the Mishnah says, why is it a marriage? Because she did not mislead him. Okay? Shloitaso Elahu hitas atzmo. He misled himself. He believed whatever he believed. The Kevon lo pirish. And since he did not express it, meaning if she would have misled him, then it's obvious. That's a mektos. The Kevon, and since whatever he had in mind, since he didn't verbalize it, lavko kamine, therefore it has no value, has no standing. Davadu dvarim shebelev. I mean, what doesn't he say? What does he have to say? Because he misled himself. He misled himself, and therefore it's a dvarim shebelev. Let's say it's dvarim shebelev. What do we have to talk about him misleading himself? No. I think he's saying like this. Like I said, if a person comes from a certain kind of background, and there's no way this woman it would be eligible for him, right? He's not in any he's gullible. He's a gullible person. But even though he may be gullible, but if it's that important to you, you should have verbalized it. And if you didn't verbalize it, that's an indication that it may not be necessarily the point. You're willing to somehow to overlook whatever that issue may be. Because if it was that important to you, you should have said something. But again, he's saying, "Hu hitos atzmo." He misled himself. Those are the words of Rashi. Because he's going on the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, "Because she did not mislead him." Right? That's what the Mishnah says. Why she? That says, "Because she did not mislead him." But factually, he himself, we're not believing him. He says, "Truly, I thought she was wealthy, and I only want to marry. She's a wealthy woman." We say it doesn't make a difference. But since it's not an ansari, we can't say it with certainty, we classify it as Dvarim Shebelev. So we believe him that he had that in mind, but it's irrelevant. Unless you verbalize it, it has no standing, no legal standing. So that Rashi says, "Who hit atzmo?" You know, the Gemara says we had the Mishnah Chulin about Genevas Das. What's Genevas Das? Genevas Das is, the Mishnah says, at one time, if you'd have a barrel of wine, and once you open the barrel, then it's susceptible for souring. So you would only open a barrel of wine on one or two situations. Either you pre-sell all the wine, so therefore, if you pre-sell it, you sell it out immediately, so it doesn't stay in the barrel to sour. Or you open the barrel where you have a special guest. That despite the fact is that you'll take a financial loss, but to show the person to what degree you value him, you open a new barrel of wine, despite the chance of the wine souring what remains in the barrel. So a person goes and he says, he has a guest come to his home, and he opens a new barrel of wine for him. And he says, "You're my guest, I'm opening a barrel." Meantime, he's resold all the wine. Right? And the guest doesn't understand that. That's Genevas Das. Why? Because the guest now has a debt of gratitude to the host. Look the way he's hosting him. He's willing to take a chance of taking a financial loss to honor him. But factually, it's misleading. What about, the Gemara tells of a story, the two Amorim, they were walking outside the city, taking a stroll, and they met another Amora. And he says, "You know, I'm really honored that you came out to greet me." Right? But they didn't. So Gemara says, so they said to him, one of them says, "We didn't come out to greet you. We haven't been strolling outside the city, in the forest." So the Gemara says he had no obligation to tell him. Why? Because that comment, there was no basis even for him to make that comment. It's not they misled him. That he misled himself. So therefore, you could believe what you want to believe. If that's what I'm saying. That's hitas atzmo. You misled yourself. Did I cause you to what? To think that? If you state something that I want you to believe that, that's genevas das. Because there's no basis for that debt of gratitude. But here, you want to obligate yourself. You want to feel indebted to me. You want to feel indebted to me. That's your issue if you want to feel indebted.
What if she sets up the circumstance? She wears very expensive jewelry. And that's all he sees?
And the average person, wait one second, the average person would see this woman, he would see her as a wealthy woman, then it would be a mekatos. Then it would be a mekatos. She did nothing to indicate that she was a wealthy woman. Not whatsoever.
Rabbi, the whole Mishnah describes exactly what happened to Yaakov and Leah.
Leah was a lot worse.
Yeah,
That was a mekatos. It was a mekatos.
yeah,
The Mishnah says it's not a mekatos. Right? This is not. This is a valid marriage. That shouldn't have been a marriage. That's a question.
yeah,
Where, by Yaakov and Leah?
yeah.
Good question. Now you're asking, we want you to should have asked the question when you learned the parsha. How many times you learned the parsha?
It should have been an invalidated marriage.
Not invalid. Should have not been a valid marriage. Not invalid. It shouldn't have been valid.
Yeah.
It's okay. So, David, what did you say?
No, I think that Yaakov opted to defend him. He could have. I think he learned, but he could have.
You could have.
He understood that Hashem played a hand in it.
No,
Can't
no.
accept that there wasn't real.
So the way I understood it was even more so. It's not later he validated. When he consummated the marriage with whoever that woman was, he had in mind, this is going to be my wife. Why? Because we find when he gave the bracha to Ruvain before he passed away, what did he say to Ruvain? Reishis kochi v'reishis oni. Right? He says, you're the first of my seed. He was. How old was he when he was married? He was 84 years old. He never wasted a droplet of semen in his life. This is the first of his seed. So if Hashem wants him to expend the seed into this woman, she's meant to be his wife. That was his mindset. That's the reason why it was the mekachtos. That means it's me Hashem yotzad dover. That God wants this should be my wife. Am I upset afterwards that he misled him? I mean, he was fooled. He was upset with Lavan. But factually, it was not a mekatos. That's the reason why it wasn't. For someone else, it would have been a mekatos. I never wanted to marry this. I meant to marry someone else, not this woman.
But even the Hachel was part of the plot.
Okay, we're now learning parshas Hashua now. Okay? Okay? But again, who hit us atzmo? Because this was something in his mind. The emphasis is not to hit us atzmo. Since it's something was hit in his mind, and it's not based on the reality of the situation, therefore that's the reason why it's considered Dvar Shalev. It's not so much to hit us atzmo. He misled himself. That means it's not obvious from what was happening. That's why it's a Dvar Shalev. Okay. Now, getting to something interesting now. There's a concept. A person wants to be makna davar shelo b'olam. You want to transfer something, transact something which hasn't yet come about. You want to affect something which hasn't yet come about. Okay? Mishnah gives a number of examples. A person's a non-Jew, and he gives a woman, a Jewish woman, kiddushin. He's already been studying to convert for 3 years. He has the bezdin set in place, and he gives her money. He says, "Harei mukadeshes li." We had earlier, if a person gives a woman a ring, he says, "Harei mukadeshes lach shloshim yom." She's mukadeshes, right? She's married. So he says, "Harei mukadeshes li lach she's gayer." The marriage should take effect after I convert. Is it valid or not? So the Mishnah says, "En mukadeshes." She's still a shiksa. She's about to. He says, "You're married to me. I'm giving you the ring now. It should take effect after you come out of the mikveh." Okay? After the rabbis give you your certificate of conversion. En mukadeshes. She's not married. Okay? A person's an Evet Kanani. Kanani slave. He has no relevance to marriage. And the master is about to emancipate him. Lachshish tachre, lachshish tachri. She's a shivcha kananis. Lacha shiyomas bailich. Yeah, woman. She's a married woman. Husband he's in the ICU, whatever it is. They're watching the pulse go down, but it hasn't yet. He's a harem ukdeshes league. Afterwards, after he dies, the marriage should take effect. But she's a married woman now. So since the act of marriage is being given to a woman who's a married woman, although it's to affect something which should be effective, because when she's a widow, olach shetomus achosech. He's married to a woman, and he wants to marry her sister. Okay? He says, after your sister dies, then I'm marrying you. Lach shetomus achosech. It's interesting. It's an interesting way. After your sister dies, he doesn't say after his wife dies. His wife is the sister. I'll marry you after your sister dies. Somebody, years ago, they used to have these people. Actually, Elliot's father knew this person from Laurie's side. The man was a genius, but he was what they call a real let's. And he was European. And he goes to the person who has yortzeit. He has a right to the omut. So he goes to the gabbai, and he says to the gabbai, I have yortzeit. He said, who do you have yortzeit for? For the sister of my aunt. He said, well, whoever heard of such a thing? He says, well, whoever heard of such? He said, it's my mother. Same thing. When your sister will die, that's when I'm marrying you.
He may not be married to that.
No, he may not be married.
He has to be, otherwise.
His ex-wife can't marry the sister.
I said, so that's exactly what I'm saying. Lachshe Thomas Achosech.
Could be his wife or his ex.
Ex-wife, same thing. Lacha sheyachlutz lech yivomech. A woman, her husband died childless, and she's a woman in waiting now. She hasn't received a release yet. And there's a machlokes in Yevomis. It says, why is a Yevom not permitted to remarry before, unless she has chalitz? Because it says, lo si eish sames hachutz lizor. So it's a lav. So seemingly, if you marry a chayvin lavim, she should be mukadeshes. There's a machlokes in the Gemara whether by Yevoma, before chalitza, there's no tfisas kiddushin. So it's clear from this Mishnah that it's going according to the opinion that you cannot marry Yevoma l'shuk. That until she gets the release, she's like a married woman. Lach yachlitz lech yevomich ein mukadeshes. Every one of these cases is considered dav shelo b'olam, because since the effect cannot be done now, only after something must happen. It's not within your reach. You can only affect something which is within your reach. Something which is not within your reach, you cannot affect. Chen omer lechavero im yoldo ishtchon nekevo hareizu mukadeshes lig. En mukadeshes. He says, if your wife should give birth to a female, harei mukadeshes li. I want to marry her. En mukadeshes. A woman she hasn't even conceived. He says, if you should have a daughter, whenever you should have a daughter, the father can marry his daughter off, correct? So he gives the father money. He says, when your daughter will be born, whenever it may be, she will be my wife. It's meaningless. What about him? Eishes chaver muberes. Let's say she already was pregnant. There was a fetus. And that means there was a viable fetus. Dvor of kayomin. Im yolda dekevim kodeshes. Right? Because it's like a condition. Right? If it's a male, not. If it's a female, yes. In terms of what? Davashal balolam. Just the opposite. I mean, everybody agrees. There's not even avidi da'osi. Bav Mitzia.
Something is going to come about naturally, like the apple tree.
That's something else. That's a yield. That's called avidi da'osi. It's meant to happen. The Gemara is going to show. Gemara's going to show these cases are not, because the woman could change her mind, even though she agrees now. But since before, right, it doesn't, because the Gemara is going to ask a question. What about if you have the bezdin set? The Bezdin doesn't have to convene. The Bezdin could say, we're not interested at the last moment. They could retract. You have to be in full control of the situation. If you're not in full control of the situation, then it's considered, that's davar shelo b'olam. Everybody agrees. No. Because the presumption is there will be. Right? The tree has its yields. Year in and year out, it has its yield. Evidently, from here we see it is. Tanan Hosam. Okay. We learned in the Mishnah Trumos. Howard, is your expertise. Trumos. Tanan Hosam. Now, the halacha is if you have untithed grain, which grew in Eretz Yisrael, it has to be tithed. It's called tevel. Now, it's interesting. We had a Gemara in a number of locations. We had it in Be'ah, we had it in Shabbos. When the Torah speaks about the obligation of tithing grain, it's referred to as dogon. What is the meaning of dogon? Dogon means processed grain. It's called nigmar malocha. It's been processed to a degree. It doesn't mean it's been milled, but it's been harvested, and it's what? And it was brought, it was piled in a pile. It's called a kri. It's like it's brought to the silo. That's considered harvested. Then it's classified as tevel. Tevel, the Torah says, you're not permitted to eat unless you tithe it. What about you want to pick? Let's say you just want to pick a kernel right off the stalk, just to snack on. Even rabbinically, you're permitted. Before the Gemara Malacha, before it's been fully processed. What about to eat something which is substantial amount? Rabbinically, you're not permitted to do it. Only rabbinical, you're not permitted. It's called achilas keva. Achilas haray you're permitted, achilas keva not. But if it would be idgan, if it would be processed, because the Gemara says dogon means processed, even to have a kernel, as much as a kernel, is a Torah violation. Because it's tevel, eating tevel. Okay? What would be a person before he brought in the harvest? He goes and he tithes it before he actually completes the harvest. The effect, no, after it's been cut. Before it's been cut in the field, he didn't bring in the sheaves from the field to bring into the silo. And he tithes it at that point. That's before it's dogon. Is it effective? So we have the Gemara. The Gemara says in a number of locations it's valid. Although he has no obligation, although what he's affecting is not yet tevel, it's not tevel. But if he should do it, it's called kodma b'shibolim. Even though it's still in the sheaves, but it's been cut from the ground, it's a valid tithing, and the truma is truma, and all the tithes that he takes from it are considered valid. What about it hasn't even been cut from the ground? It's mechuber lekarka. It's still attached. You could tithe from today forever. You cannot tithe on something that's still attached. Even though it may not be growing. It may not be growing. But if it's still attached to the ground, you cannot tithe on it. So let's say you take now another halacha. The Gemara says that if you have, let's say, you grow something in a flower, a sealed pot. There's no hole on the bottom. Let's say you have grain growing in that pot. The obligation of tithing is that a Torah obligation or rabbinic obligation. It's only rabbinic. The only time you're obligated is only if it's growing in the ground of Eretz Yisrael. But if it's a sealed pot where the nourishment has no relevance to the ground, it's rabbinic. Even it's a clay pot. Even it's a clay pot. Now, what happens? You harvest grain from the field, which there it's a Torah obligation. That wheat has to be tithed. And you harvest the grain that grows in a hothouse where the floor is made of cement. You have earth on cement, so what grows in that hothouse with the cement floor, with earth on top of it, that's rabbinic. And you tithe from one on the other. Is it a valid tithing? The answer is it's not valid. Because you only could tithe from min achiv al achiv, not min achiv al aptur. Both items, both produce, have to have the same level of obligation. They have to have the same classification. It's only something that you're obligated to tithe on the Torah level could affect something that you're obligated to tithe on the Torah level. So if you would take from, let's say, the grain that grew in the pot for the grain that grew in the field, it's not a valid tithing. It still retains its temple status. And vice versa, the same thing. You cannot tithe from chiyuv al aptur. Because again, you're tithing, you're affecting something. You're not affecting anything because what grows in the pot on a Torah level is not tevel. You're permitted to eat it without doing anything. So you have to have min achiv al achiv. So now, you have grain still growing, and I have grain that's harvested. I tithe from the cut grain on the grain that hasn't yet been harvested, that hasn't been cut. So the grain that what I tithe, what is it? It retains its tevel status. because that's the equivalent of minachiv al aptur. Because what's growing, the Torah says you don't have to tithe that. And what you already cut, that you have to tithe. So therefore, it's not valid. So if it's not valid, what is it? It retains its tevel status. It only changes its status from tevel to chulin or to truma only if the effect of the tithing is considered valid tithing. Right? That's the halacha. So that's the Mishnah. Ein Torah min atola shalom mechuber. If a person wants to take truma, something that's been cut, to affect something that's still growing. Vim Torah mein truma so truma. And if you did do such a tithing, the truma is not considered truma. So what is it? It's tevel. It remains tevel. So Rashi says, now let's say I would take other tevel, and I would tithe from that tevel onto this tevel. What originally I called truma is all chulin. Right? You following what I'm saying? We're saying now, let's say I would have had 2 piles of grain. I said, pile A should be truma for pile B. So what is pile A? It becomes truma. But I say pile A should be truma for what's still growing in the field. It's a meaningless statement. Now I take another pile, and I say, also, which was cut. I say pile B should be truma for pile A, which originally I called truma, which meant nothing. So pile A is totally chulin, correct? Because what I originally designated as truma, that designation had no value, because originally I wanted to tithe something that was growing. So that's not a valid tithing. So that's what Rashi says. What originally you designated as truma is meaningless. So now when you do a valid tithing, that you originally said should be truma could be totally chulin for that reason. Okay? You could take a piece also, same thing. No, we'll see. We'll discuss this in a minute. No, it's not a dav shelo balol. It's not the reason. No, because we'll see in a moment. No. That's the reason. It's not because of dav shelo balol. Because factually, you have the ability to detach it at this moment. Okay, so you have to say why. Why, if something's still growing, can you not tithe something that's growing? So there's an argument, Rashi and Tosas here. And Tosas seems to ask a question on Rashi, which has no answer. Let's see Rashi. Mechuber einu chai b'truma. Something that's growing, you have no chiyuv, you have no obligation to tithe. Why? Because when the Torah speaks about tithing, it says, Reishis de goncho, the first of your grain. Ksiv, midi de midgan, something that's been processed. What does that mean? Shenesa bikri. It was gathered into a pile. Meaning it was gathered it was piled up. Hilkoch lochal shem truma ala tolush. Shu for shalom. Therefore, what was cut, did you tithe for what was still growing? Does not assume the status of truma. The tevel hu biyara kohen. So therefore, that cut grain remains tevel. Now, if he would tithe from other grain onto that, v'kula chulin, it's all chulin. And what he originally wanted to affect, which is still growing, hasn't been perfected. And when it will be harvested, he has to be Torah. He has to take truma. So Rashi is saying, Rashi is difficult. Rashi says, why, when something's growing, why can it not be affected? Because it says, it says, Reishis de goncha, midi de midgan, something that's dogon. And what's dogon? Shenesa bikri. It's been gathered into the silo. Right? That's the reason why it's ineffective. So Tosas asks, but the facts that we just said before, that if a person wants to tithe something which hasn't yet been harvested, as long as it's been cut, although you have no obligation, it's a valid tithing. But Rashi says, the Torah says, the Gontcha means, midi de midgan shenesa b'kri. It's only something that's assumed the status of dogon. It's been gathered, it's been harvested into the silo to be piled up. So how do we answer Tosas' question? It seems to be Tosas is actually, it's a basis to refute Rashi. And therefore Tosas learns a whole different pshat in the understanding of the Gemara. Right? So I think the pshat in Rashi is this. There's a halacha, the Torah says when testimony is offered in court, the testimony, the judges have to hear the testimony directly from the witnesses. Therefore, let's say the witnesses speak a language which the judges don't understand. You have an interpreter. It's not valid testimony. Because there says, Al Pish, Nai made him Yokum Dover. The judges have to hear the testimony directly from the mouths of the witnesses. Here they're not hearing it from the witnesses. They're hearing it through the interpreter. Because they don't understand the language the witnesses are saying. That's the reason why we speak always, the Sanhedrin had to understand 70 languages. To be able, when they interrogated the witnesses, they should understand what the witnesses are saying. Okay? So there's discussion, if a person wants to write his testimony, written testimony, is written testimony valid? Is it valid or not valid? So the Gemara says, a person writes, let's say a person witnesses something and he records what he sees. And later, he forgets what he originally saw, and now he's gone through his notes, and he reads what he had written. So the Gemara says in Ksubis, if when he reads what he wrote, he remembers the event, and now he offers his testimony as valid testimony. Right? Because what is the basis for the testimony? His recollection. But if he has no recollection whatsoever, and it's purely from the notes, it's not a valid testimony, because that's called mipiyam v'lo miksovo. Because what's the basis for the testimony? What was written. It's not from what he witnessed. Al pishnai made him yokum. It's mipiyam v'lo miksovo. Right? Nobody argues that case. If a person doesn't remember, has no recollection of the original testimony, even though his notes are definitely, it's his recording of the event, it's not valid testimony. The question is, what about if I remember and I record my testimony, I send my testimony to the court? Could the court, and the court knows factually that I still recall the testimony, because let's say I just recorded it yesterday. The person says, I'm too busy. They called me up. I said, look, I'm going to write it down and send it to the court. Is that admissible testimony in court? It's Machlos Rashi and Tosis. Rashi holds it's valid. Why? That since the witnesses themselves can testify in person, if you could testify in person, then it's permissible to admit written testimony. Because we have a principle, which we discussed, that it says, we had, the Gemara says, we had earlier that if you have a mincha, the largest vessel in the Beis HaMikdash had a certain capacity. So the Torah says by mincha you add oil, and then there's a mitzvah to stir it, to mix it. To mix the flour and the oil for the meal offering. This week we've just read about the mincha. Right? It says mincha belula b'shemen. You have to mix. What happens if the person doesn't mix it? Doesn't mix it. Is it a valid mincha? It's valid. Why? So Reb Zera says, because you may have not performed the mitzvah of mixing, but factually, but since it can be mixed, it doesn't invalidate it. Because so Rashi says, similarly, if actually the witnesses can offer the testimony in person, although they're admitting it in writing, since it can be offered in person, even written testimony is admissible in court. That's Rashi. Same idea.
And if the person is dead?
No. So if he dies, of course, then it's not admissible any longer. So that's the whole discussion. There's a discussion if you have a shtar, right? If you have a document, a witness sign on the document, and let's say the witnesses, they die. So why is the document a valid document? I mean, the testimony of the witnesses say, if you learn like Rashi, say, right? They're alive. It's viable. That's considered viable testimony because they themselves could offer that same testimony in court, right? What about they forgot? What about if they will forget, right? If they forget what they originally had signed on. That's exercise because of a shtar. The Torah says a shtar, a document, a legal document. It says when you sign a document, it's like testifying in court. That's only because it meets the criteria of a document, of a legal document. But just written testimony, you send in the testimony to the court, it's not within the context of a document. That's the argument Rashi and Tosis. So we wanted to say, which we'll continue tomorrow, that since Rashi says, as long as you have the ability to process it, although it hasn't been processed, but it can be processed, that's Roy Labila. So even though it hasn't been idgan, but since it can be piled into a pile, and it's with my ability to do it, that's sufficient to give it that same status.